Welcome to chapter 15, our final chapter of the quarter. In this chapter, we're going to talk about stress and worker well-being. Our worker in this picture does not look like he is feeling super well. Maybe too much stress. I thought it'd be fun to prompt you to have sort of a thought exercise. Think of a time that you felt stressed while you were at work or, during a class or in preparation for a class or something like that. Think of a time that you felt stress and think about what was it about the work situation, whether it's a paid work situation or a school work situation. What was it that caused the stress? And what did you do to reduce the stress? When we can identify the factors that trigger our stress response, that helps us to take steps to make those triggers less powerful for us. And when we do experience stress, if we have strategies that allow us to reduce the stress, that also helps to minimize the effects of the stress, the long-term, health-related effects. So think about that. And, the more you can reflect and look for maybe you can think of multiple times that you've been stressed and maybe in different circumstances, but had the same kind of sort of stress reaction. Maybe you can identify the factors that led to that feeling of stress and develop good strategies for reducing the stress. So what we're going to learn in this chapter is, the definition of stress, some common stressors, the consequences of stress, the effects of stress on our behavior, ways to reduce stress, the importance of family-friendly programs, and then how stress at times can result in workplace violence. All right, so let's talk about stress and strains. All right, stress. Stress is a force that pushes psychological or physical function beyond its range of stability. Okay, so think about that as a definition of stress. It's a force that pushes psychological or physical function beyond its range of stability. So whatever the stress is causing the person to be out of balance. Can it be a good thing? Being under a little bit of stress can actually be very energizing, very motivating, can keep us on task. But it also can be a bad thing. When we're experiencing stress, we may experience a feeling of exhaustion. We might have somatic symptoms like headaches or dizziness or shaking. We might have high blood pressure, digestive problems, might even experience chest pain, certainly muscle tension, aches and pains. It might manifest as sexual dysfunction, and it makes us more vulnerable to all different kinds of infections and illness. So stress is a force that pushes our psychological or physical function beyond its range of stability, and it leads to what we call strain. So these physical symptoms of stress are what we mean by the word strain. Undesirable personal outcomes, right? So physical things. It also can manifest itself in interpersonal problems. When you're under stress, you might berate someone that normally you wouldn't talk to like that. Maybe blame somebody for something that they didn't really do, but it makes you feel better at the moment. Things like that. So you get some emotional symptoms as well as part of strain. So anxiety or irritability. Depression can be a long-term manifestation. You may experience panic attacks. You might experience just a feeling of sadness if you're experiencing stress. So different people have sort of different reactions. You could have any combination of anything that I've got on the screen here. I got this from Cleveland Clinic, these pictures. But so you can have any mix or match of kinds of responses, and you might have different responses depending on what the stressor really was. So your manifestation of strain is kind of a representation of what has triggered that strain. So let's talk a little bit about the general stress model. In this model, it says that sources of stress can lead to organizational stress, and that can lead to strains. So in between organizational stress and then the experiencing of strains, there is the opportunity to exercise coping strategies to help mitigate the effects of the stress, to help reduce the likelihood of developing strains. So what sorts of things cause stress? intrinsic work factors. There are some kinds of jobs that are just sort of intrinsically stressful. Sorry, I forgot to mute my phone. And so things like poor working conditions, long hours, excessive travel is stressful, lack of control over the decisions. Like, it's one thing to say, yeah, I'd love to travel, but if you have to do it when you're told to, that might make the travel extra stressful, right? So having things sort of be out of control is stressful. But these are characteristics of the job, right? These are intrinsic to the job that you might have. Karasek's demand control model of stress says that the psychological demands of the work plus the employee's decision latitude, how much control you have over the work, contribute to stress. So if you have more control over the situation, even if you're in a psychologically demanding role, it may not feel as stressful because you're the one who decided to do what you're doing. You're the one who decided to invest the hours or to take on this new client or whatever you're doing. So if you feel like you have the ability to say, I don't want to do this anymore, but you're choosing to still do it, that means that those behaviors, that the conditions of the work are going to be less stressful than if you feel like you have to do it. You need every dollar of this job, or this job is not set up for you to have personal freedom in it, or whatever it is, but you feel trapped. So maybe the decision latitude even is to the point where it's like, I can't even quit this job. I can't decide what I'm doing at the job, and I can't even quit the job. That's going to make those same psychological demands more stressful than if you feel like you have control. There are role variables that can contribute to stress. So like role ambiguity. If you're not sure what a person in your role in this organization is supposed to be doing, like, what do you expect of me? A lot of times people experience role ambiguity when they think they know what their role is and they're doing the things that are their role, and they maybe are being criticized for overreaching, doing things that aren't part of their role, but they thought it was part of their role. And so that sort of, I almost want to say that sort of discipline that you get when somebody tells you you've done something wrong can be stressful, especially when you thought you were doing the right thing. On the other side, so just for fun, I don't know if you can see these pop-ups, but for some reason, I think somebody I know on Microsoft Teams has been hacked, and I am getting pop-up after pop-up of random invitations to join teams with people. So I apologize. I don't know how to make it stop. So I apologize for that. So unclear role expectations. What if, on the other hand, you're being berated for not doing something that you didn't think was part of your role? That's the same kind of stressor as being told you're doing more than you should be doing. And that comes from role ambiguity. Role conflict is when there are inconsistent role expectations. So one day you're told, oh, no, leave that for Fred. That's his job. And then the next day you're asked, why haven't you done this task? And you're like, I thought that was Fred's job. And then you're like, no, that's not, you're supposed to be doing this. And you're like, just yesterday you told me to leave it for Fred. That kind of conflict, that kind of inconsistent situation can contribute to stress. You don't know what's going on, basically, and that's stressful. Interpersonal relationships with supervisors, with coworkers, with clients. Anytime you're dealing with the other humans, there's the possibility of, a stressful encounter where things can go sideways without expectation. Career development can be stressful, right? You're trying to move up, you're trying to develop, and you may feel like there are blocks or things that are keeping you from getting where you want to go. And then individual differences. Some people are just more likely to be stressed than other people. People who are type A are more prone to stress than people who are type B. Oops, I thought I had a little diagram of those types. Type A people tend to be very hard driving, very competitive. Type B people are a lot more laid back, and they maybe aren't as motivated by success or by other people's accolades and things like that. Type D personalities, they oftentimes will have sort of a mix of type A and type B personalities, but the characteristic that they have makes them very prone to experiencing stress, where they just sort of are a little bit more neurotic, which neurotic itself is down farther on the list. Pessimists are more likely to experience the same exact thing in the environment as stressful than a person who's more optimistic. An optimist is more likely to put a good, face on whatever it is that they experienced, whereas the pessimist is more likely to sound a little bit like Eeyore, saying, "Oh no, I knew it. Of course, nobody likes me. Nothing works for me." That pessimists are not usually that bad, but that kind of "I knew it. I'm always waiting for the bad thing to happen." That kind of perspective is associated with perceiving events as stressful. People who are higher on neuroticism. We haven't really talked about neuroticism much when we talk about the Big Five inventory. It's one of the 5 traits on the Big Five inventory, and it is a trait that's associated with being worrisome, a little bit prone to depression, and so a little anxious, a little depressed, right? People who are higher on neuroticism are more likely to experience stress than people who are lower on that. Gender. Females are more likely to perceive work-related factors as stressful than males are. Ethnicity, depending on the context, if you are in the minority group, you may experience events at work as stressful because it feels like it's part of the whole milieu of being in the minority and maybe out of control and like that. So same thing with race, right? So if you're in the minority, that's part of why gender relates to stress also, because if you feel like you're not in the power position, you're more likely to perceive things as stressful. And then stress sensitization. Some people have had lots of stressors across their life and they may have become immune to it, and maybe they have learned how to cope, or maybe they've come up with strategies for helping themselves to deal with stress, whereas other people have not had much experience with stress, and so they're going to be more activated by even the smallest amount of stress. So younger workers may find themselves more stressed by deadlines or by criticism from their supervisor than an older worker might be, because the older worker has more experience with that. So having been sensitized. All right, episodic versus chronic stress. So episodic stress is the kind of stress that you experience in an episode. It's got like a start, a middle, and an end, right? So it's an acute situation. I've got a picture of a firefighter, right? Because you've got like this very challenging event that you're dealing with right now, this wildfire or this multi-car accident or whatever it is that you're dealing with. That's an acute stressor at the time of dealing with this particular thing. Other examples of acute situations, family issues, there's been discord in the household or something. Changing economic conditions, the stock market crashes or there's suddenly a recession or something, but it's acute. It's something very, it's happening right now. It's not something long term. And then experiencing trauma of any sort, a brief trauma, an acute, a beginning, middle, and end kind of situation. Chronic stress is ongoing. So I'm trying to distinguish the episodic from the more ongoing stress. So for example, living in poverty is looked at as a chronic stressor. There's just always pressure. Being in a dysfunctional family. Back in the 80s, they had expanded the definition of dysfunctional family to the point where everybody lives in a dysfunctional family. But what really is meant by dysfunctional family is that there's a lot of discord, there's maybe some substance abuse or a lot of fighting, maybe some abuse going on, things like that. Pain, people who experience chronic pain, it's very stressful. If day in and day out, you're living with back pain or knee pain or chronic neck pain or hands or feet or like just something hurts all the time, it is a stressor that the person's living under. And it's chronic because pain tends to be chronic, unless it's a very acute injury, in which case it would fall under the episodic stress. So chronic stress is the type of stressor that's more likely to lead to suicide, to violence, and to many other medical disorders like heart disease and type 2 diabetes and other kinds of things that can come from chronic stress. Episodic stress, on the other hand, you're less likely to have those kinds of, major effects from acute stress or episodic stress. All right, let's go ahead and stop here and we'll come back in the next video and talk about strain.